Today, I'm going to tell you a story of my own encounter with noise. It's an incident that took place 5 years ago in the heart of an ancient city on a distant continent, which is far away from my own country, India. In February 2019, I was invited by my teacher, friend, and renowned oral historian Alessandro Portelli to perform at a prestigious venue in Rome. It's called the Theatre of Villa Torlonia. For those who are not familiar with the name, Villa Torlonia is a historical building in Italy. It's a villa which is turned into a palace with surrounding gardens built in around 1806 that belonged to a very wealthy family in Italy in the 19th century. They are called the Torlonias, that acquired a huge fortune in the 18th and 19th centuries through administering the finances of the Vatican. For more than 100 years, the villa served as a residential palace of the Torlonias. Then, there was a break in the rhythm. New histories were written. In 1920, an influential man in Italy desired to purchase the palace from the Torlonias. I'm not sure if he was able to purchase the building, but he conspiringly rented it for a negligible price of only 1 lira a year. I know many of you must be thinking that Italy's current currency is euro. Yes, you are absolutely right. However, the lira has been the Italian currency for more than a century. Between 1861 and 2002. Can you guess the person who rented the palace from the Torlonias? Someone whose name will always remain etched in the history of Italy. Not only that, in the history of Europe and even in the history of human civilization. I'll tell you the name. It was the very famous Italian dictator, Mr. Benito Mussolini. The man who founded the National Fascist Party and also served as the Prime Minister of Italy in the 1940s. He rented this house to use it as a state residence, and for more than 18 years, he and his family resided in this building. Now, in 1945, just 2 years before the Indian independence, the fascist rule in the Kingdom of Italy came to an end. After 21 years, a new government was formed and Mussolini was placed under arrest. At that time, the building that served as his residence for so many years was suddenly abandoned. It remained in a dilapidated state for several years. Then, the Italian government decided to restore the building and transform it into a public museum. Although with the museum, they also turned a significant part of the building into an auditorium and named it the Theatre of Villa Torlonia. This was the auditorium where I was supposed to sing to an audience who barely knew my native language, Bangla. I was afraid, I was excited, because it was a rare opportunity for me. I usually do not get that opportunity to sing my songs, especially my songs written in my native language, Bangla, to an audience who belong to a distant cultural terrain. So it was a very special moment for me. And I wanted to share this news with my father. But I could not. When I was young, my father told me something that I will never forget. His words are engraved in my mind. It still echoes. When I was asked what I wanted to do in life, I told him that I wanted to do music. I told him that I want to write songs. He told me, Baba, amra Shahara eshob kore na. For those who are unfamiliar with Bangla, I will translate this. It meant we do not do music and arts because the Shahas usually belong to the Vaishya community within the Hindu caste system. And they are mostly known for being traders and merchants, but they barely do arts and music. I could not relate to his thoughts at that moment. I never felt the gravity of that statement. It really took me a decade or more to understand the depth of that statement. It really took me years to understand that perception of what I can do and what I'm supposed to do is somehow rooted in our histories, is rooted in how certain communities are compelled to think, how certain communities are compelled to act and conduct. Anyway, at that moment, I took it as a challenge and kept it as a secret to myself. That one day I will write songs and compose tunes and people will listen to those songs. So when I got an invitation to perform my songs at the Villa Torlonia, I wanted to tell my father that I had been invited to perform my own songs at an event that would celebrate the music of none other than Bob Dylan. A festival that aimed to celebrate the songs of resistance across the globe. And I was fortunate to be able to sing my own songs at that event. I knew that it wouldn't make a difference to him because he doesn't know who Bob Dylan is. He won't know what Villa Torlonia is. He won't understand what protest music means for that matter. I kept it inside my heart because I was excited and I was afraid. What if I'm not able to do justice to that opportunity? What if I fail to convey the emotions of people whom I wanted to talk about in and through my songs? I was more skeptical about the fact that what would happen if I performed a Bangla song to the Italian audience. Will all of them understand the meaning of it? What will happen to the local citizens who do not know my language? Is it at all worth singing Bangla songs to them? Or should I sing an English song that they might be able to comprehend and connect with? Now, honestly, I was afraid to sing my own songs to an audience of a different culture who, in my understanding, barely knew my language and also barely knew the nuances through which the Bengali expressions. I was thinking about this philosopher, Paul Heggarty. Heggarty once wrote that the language of subcultures has always been treated as noise by the dominant cultures. This statement kept on echoing in my mind. So I was thinking that my song would sound gibberish to them, because in a city where the dominant culture and the language is Italian, Bangla would certainly sound or appear as noise. But something very interesting happened when I actually started singing inside that auditorium. As I started singing, I closed my eyes. And the moment I closed my eyes, I could hear my own voice blaring out of the loudspeakers. The distinctiveness of each and every frequency, the guitars, the voice, everything sounded rich within the acoustic settings of that room, or for that matter, that auditorium. I was quite surprised to hear my own voice like that. I think in my own country where I grew up, listening to the cacophonies of traffic noise, quarreling neighbors, and loud music in an enclosed neighborhood, this type of silence has always been a rare luxury. And hence, I could never listen to my voice or the finer frequencies of my own voice like that. It was completely new to me. My own voice sounded new to me. Certain frequencies of my own voice almost appeared unfamiliar. And I'm not exaggerating. I literally felt that my voice suddenly appeared almost unfamiliar to me. I wanted to spend some time with this feeling. So, what I did is I strolled across the building. I randomly hummed just for the fun of hearing back my own voice in a different avatar. And while I was doing that, I really felt some sort of a pleasure just to be able to hear the minute frequencies of my own voice without being too loud or without exaggerating or without exerting pressure on my own voice. I realized that it was actually the magic of silence inside that room that made my voice more distinct to my ears. It was more distinct than how it sounded even in the streets of this ancient city that were filled with murmurs of people chatting, car engines roaring, buses screeching, and trams tinkling. None of these sounds could enter that auditorium inside the villa. The silence was so prominent that for a moment I thought I could almost hear the sounds of Mussolini's breath floating in that air. The walls of the building were such that they obstructed outer sounds from entering the building. I believe that is always the case with almost all auditoriums across the world. I believe auditoriums are made with a certain thought in mind. I believe the architectural patterns of auditoriums, of concert halls, or for that matter, prayer rooms, are built in a certain way so that they are able to provide as much scope for contemplation to the person spending time inside that room. Because practices like listening to music, listening to live concerts, or performing a prayer where one wishes to connect with the Lord, the divine entity, I think contemplation is central, and for contemplation, some sort of a silence is required. Just the other day, I was watching this ad where a very popular Indian actor said, सुना है अच्छी नींद के लिए साइलेंस बहुत ज़रूरी है. We have heard that silence is necessary for sound sleep. I'm not going to mention the company or the ad, or for that matter, the actor. But it really provoked me to think in a certain direction that What is exactly the relationship between silence, comfort, and sleep? I'm constantly thinking about this as I am currently constantly being disturbed by the dogs barking outside. I think many of you are able to hear that sound. I'm desperately seeking some silence. Even as I record this podcast, I think that these environmental sounds or sounds that are of no use for a moment appear as noise to our ears. Anyway, let me get back to the story. Let me get back to what happened inside that villa in 1806 when Giuseppe Valadier, I really do not know the exact or the correct way of pronouncing Italian names. Okay, so Valadier, a very popular Italian architect, he was also an archaeologist and urban planner, and he was in charge of constructing the villa for the Torlonias. So he had constructed the building in such a way that the outer sounds could not enter the rooms inside the building. As I mentioned, that probably such concerns were there even in the 19th century, that outer sounds could be harmful, outer sounds could be disruptive, outer sounds could be disturbing to the comfort of everyday life. For instance, in ancient times, the chariots in Rome were banned from the streets at night. I've heard that their wheels clattered on paving stones and created a lot of noise that actually disrupted sleep and caused annoyance to the citizens. Centuries later, some cities in medieval Europe banned horse drawn carriages and even horses from the streets at night. Some would even cover the streets with straw to reduce noise and ensure a peaceful sleep for the residents. These anecdotes are everywhere across 18th and 19th centuries, or probably before that. For instance, in the 19th century, flocks of Italian workers who did not have adequate jobs planned to migrate to another flourishing European city, London, just for better employment opportunities. While some managed to get jobs, but others struggled. These Italian migrant workers would sing in the streets of London because busking was an alternate source of earning bread and butter for them. Suddenly, one day, the local British citizens complained that these Italian migrants are actually creating a lot of noise in the streets, and the music that they were creating actually disrupted their sleep. So the sounds of their voices, the sounds of those melodies, and the sounds of musical instruments, everything that reverberated across the streets of London sounded noisy to the British. It appeared noisy to their ears that had been accustomed to the etiquettes of remaining quiet and composed. Quietude has always been celebrated by the upper class. wealthy British citizens. Hence, they were often charged. I mean, the Italian workers were often charged guilty under the legal charges of civil nuisance. If we think through all these stories and try to find a connection between them, I believe it will allow us to think about this villa in a particular way. I think that it will allow us to think about this villa, about the city, and about that concert in a certain way that it will help me and probably all of us to reflect at a global problem, at a global crisis. Now let me get back to the case of Villa Torlonia. I believe when the Villa Torlonia was constructed, the architectural patterns were a primary concern for architects like Valadier. When designing homes for the wealthy House of Torlonias, who could afford the price of quietude and peaceful sleep, which the lower middle class or middle income groups in the global south countries in the present date cannot afford, such walls have been helpful in fetching good sleep, sound sleep. Years later, such walls actually helped the fascist dictator Mussolini afford the expense of sound sleep. Such walls may have helped in preventing and filtering the unnecessary frequency of protesting voices outside his house. Probably that is how the homes of the powerful and the wealthy are architected. That is how the walls can obstruct the sounds that interrupt their comfort from entering into their minds, into their bodies, and into their lives. I do not think it will be exaggerating to say that across centuries in the history of human civilization, silence and quietude have been a costly affair. Only the wealthy, the powerful, could afford to buy the luxuries of quietude. Noise and cacophonies have been for the beggars who could never be choosers. In an essay that I had read quite some time ago, which was published in this journal called Economic and Political Weekly, renowned Indian political scientist Gopal Guru wrote something. He wrote that there is a moral responsibility to the practice of social sciences in India. And then he added, this moral responsibility entails the ethics of theorization. He actually meant that how do we theorize our everyday lives? How do we theorize our daily struggles? How do we theorize our relations with others? Is it at all possible to develop a theory of our own lives and the lives of others? While reading this, I was thinking of something, and probably that reading has shaped some of what I am trying to do in this podcast. I was thinking that this planet has gifted me enough quietude to think, imagine, and contemplate sounds. It has given me enough quietude to focus on music and write songs and inscribe my thoughts on tangible melodies that could touch the souls of millions. This planet has given me enough silence to appreciate and experience the beauty of music. My decision to do a podcast or to work on noise is an act of gratitude and an act of gratefulness towards society. I know many of you may have been wondering, why did I share an otherwise distant narrative, a story about a building, about an ancient city, instead of telling facts about noise pollution? Some of you might be thinking that why did I share otherwise disjointed facts about history, culture, and politics if I really wanted to talk about an environmental problem, an environmental crisis? If you think carefully, the distant traces of history, culture, and politics are not disjointed. They are subtly tied to the history of noise. Not just noise pollution, but noise in general. When I entered the theatre of Villa Torlonia, I could hear the invisible sound frequencies of my own voice that were otherwise inaudible in the cacophonies of everyday life in India. Those frequencies made me aware of my own voice. Those frequencies made me aware of my own neighborhood in Calcutta. Those frequencies made me aware of how people live their lives in India. Those frequencies made me aware of the invisible connections between history, politics, and culture with noise. I believe if we aspire for a better society, healthier lives, and a better planet, we have to be aware of these subtle connections that govern our daily lives. Noise, in several avatars, is present in the intricate corners of our mundane lives that tremble our abilities to hear the finer frequencies of life, the finer frequencies of our own voice, the frequencies of rumbling leaves, the frequencies of the wind, the frequencies of the ocean, the sea whales, the frequencies of rain droplets and peacocks, frequencies that are otherwise suppressed by the cacophonies of modern life in an urban jungle. I will leave you with this thought and end this episode here. My name is Shourabh. I'm an anthropologist and music practitioner, and you are listening to Noise and Other Things, a podcast where we talk about some of the least known facts about noise and some of the least known stories about people who fought the crisis of noise pollution. Through this podcast, we want to create awareness among people that will hopefully inspire them to find creative and meaningful ways of mitigating the harmful effects of one of the most neglected and deadly pollutants on the planet, noise.